Hello everyone and welcome to another most impressive game from the 23rd European Team Championship that's currently being played. It's a Viktor Erdos Hungarian Grandmaster versus Nat Badur Jobava. Sorry about that, that's from the previous video. Let me just fix that. There we go. Few seconds, there we go. Alright. So Alireza Firouzja with the black pieces, and it's quite an impressive game. It's it has everything. If you've seen the thumbnail, you know that crazy stuff is happening from the beginning, and it's a very important game for Alireza's onslaught onto the world top 5. As you know, he overtook Nepo in the live ratings, then he fall back, then he again overtook Nepo in round 1 of this tournament, and now he wants to remain there and hopefully even overtake Fabi, as Fabi is currently world number 3. So let's see how this is going, as this is an incredible game, and it's not an easy one to win. So let's check it out. Erdos with the white pieces opens with e4. We have c6. Sorry about that. Alireza goes for the Caro-Kann defense. We have knight to f3 and d5. Striking in the center, knight to c3, now defending the e4 pawn, and the bishop to g4, going for the Mindeno variation. We have h3 and the bishop captures. So black gives up the bishop pair very early on. Queen captures, and now e6. And now all your pawns are on light squares. You don't have a light square bishop, so nothing to worry about. We have d4 by white, grabbing more space in the center, and the knight to f6, putting pressure on that e4 pawn. And usually white will play something like bishop to g5 or bishop to d3, adding another defender to the e4 pawn. But here we have e captures on d5, and this is not something that you would expect, because there has to be a justification for a capture in chess, and here it's not easy to find one. So okay, Alireza captures, c captures on d5. We have bishop to d3 now, and now you have the c6 square available for your knight, so Alireza just develops it to c6. So knight to c6 comes with tempo as the d4 pawn is attacked. So knight to e2, defending this, preparing c3, and we have h6 now, preventing bishop to g5. We have c3 and bishop to d6. Now saying that, okay, I might be castling kingside, but also many other things are possible. And there is one game where knight to g3 was played. It was played in 1978. But here we have bishop to c2 by Erdos, and it is now only as of move 11 that we have a completely new game. So Alireza has to continue developing. And how do you develop? Do you castle kingside? That is of course possible. And then we have a game. But with the d3 square now already being freed for the white queen, it would be maybe a bit counterintuitive to castle kingside at this point. So Alireza goes for a different idea. Rook to c8. He leaves the king in the center of the board and says, all right, this rook might be very useful here, and your bishop is on c2 undefended. So who knows, if this knight moves, we might even have some knight captures on d4 ideas in the position. So Erdos goes g4, prepares g5 here, and now again, what do you play? Well, now you're definitely not castling kingside, because white already said that he will not be castling kingside, and that you might expect an attack here. So Alireza starts with king to d7. It's the move from the thumbnail, and it is how we castle in modern chess. So there's no need to castle. We can just waste 3 moves and then bring our king to safety. This is what Alireza plays, king to d7, and there doesn't seem to be a way to take advantage of this, brilliant move right away. So here we have g5, continuing this attack. We have h captures, bishop captures, now the knight is pinned, and the king to c7. We have queenside castles, and now king to b8. And now both kings are nicely tucked in all the way on the queen side, and the game continues. We have rook d to g1, and now you might expect, all right, the kings are now on the queen side, we're going to have a nice game on the king side, you know, things will be pushed, pieces will be traded off, but not really. Alireza plays b5. He wants to play a5, b4, and start an attack against the white king on the queen side. So a3, preventing b4 for the moment, and Alireza just continues with a5. We have queen to d3, attacking that b5 pawn, and just queen to b6, defending the pawn. we have bishop captures on f6. You could also play something else. You don't really have to capture the knight, but the knight coming to e4 might be a bit of a problem. Then the f2 pawn is attacked, and it's just if you just imagine this knight on e4, it's so ugly you don't even want to imagine it. So it's better to just get rid of it right away. So g captures on f6 and rook to g7. So now we have a very active rook here, and we have to defend our f7 pawn, or maybe we don't, but that's what you first think about when someone attacks your pawn. So we could defend it with something like rook to c7. We could start the attack immediately with b4 and say I'm not interested in defending that doubled f7 pawn, or you could defend with the queen. So Alireza decides to defend with the queen. Now the queen is a bit overstretched, guarding on b5 and on f7, but for the moment there doesn't seem to be a way for white to take advantage of this. So here we have rook h to g1, and now we continue the attack, b4. So what can white do here? Well, there are a couple of options here. One very good option is to just capture. For example, a captures on b4, a captures, and now bishop to a4. So we get the b5 square available for our queen. For example, knight to a5, queen b5. And now we force a queen trade. Let's say captures, and now we bring this rook to f8 to defend the f7 pawn, and the game continues. However, black should always be a little bit better here. If nothing, he has less pawn islands, and the rook still being in the game, these pawns are somewhat weak, and the pressure on the position is definitely in black's favor. So instead, after b4, white decided to keep the tension a little bit. He played a4, and now bishop to f8. Alireza chases this rook back, and you can't really play rook to g8 because of this ugly bishop to h6 check move. For example, we just trade bishop to h6 check, and we pick up the rook here. So that loses the game on the spot. So instead, we have rook to h7, and now bishop to h6 with check. We have king to d1. You could also go to b1, but that just looks ugly with the queen being on b7 and all. So f5, now disconnecting the queen's defense of the rook on h7, you have to trade here. Rook captures on h8, we have rook captures on h8, and now rook to g3, as this pawn is a little bit weak, and you kind of want to have this option of maybe, if the position opens up, shifting this rook over to the b file. So rook back to c8 by Alireza, and now king to e1. We have to find a bit of a safer square for our king. We have b captures on c3, b captures, and now knight to e7. And now Alireza is preparing for the end game, and this is how he does it. King to f1, and now this is the beautiful move, king to a7. The problem is, if you play something like queen to b2, and it seems like a move you really want to play, it's a very active move with the queen, not a lot for white to do. The problem is white has this queen to a6 move, and it doesn't seem like you have all that much to do here now. That queen remaining there is not an option, and of course if we capture some material, then it's an instant draw by repetition, and of course something Alireza wants to avoid at all costs. So here, after king to f1, we have king to a7, and now we prepare to go into the endgame with queen to a6 and claim that we have a better setup. So here we have rook to g1 and queen to a6, offering a queen trade. White obliges. We have queen captures on a6, king captures, and now bishop to d3 with check. We have king to a7, and now bishop to b5. And if you look at the position now, this is what Alireza wanted. He has 2 pawn islands. His opponent has 3 pawn islands, and of course, or rather 4 pawn islands. So it's going to be a little bit easier for black to play this, as white has many weaknesses. Realistically, the only weakness in black's camp is the f7 pawn, which is the base of this pawn chain, and also the a5 pawn, but it doesn't look like there's a real way for you to reach the a5 pawn. The bishop can't go after it. It's a light square bishop. The rook has many moves to reach the a5 pawn. The knight could reach it with something like knight c1 and knight here, but it will always be very easy for the king to defend it. So it's a weakness, but not one that white can easily take advantage of. So here the f7 pawn is the real weakness, and black has that covered very nicely with the bishop and and the knight guarding all of these squares, there's no way for white to lift the rook. So it's an equalish position, you know, the material is equal, but black is definitely better here. So knight to g8, Alireza wants to play knight to f6, knight to e4, and put even more pressure on the c3 pawn, because this c3 pawn is a weakness. So rook g3, preparing to defend that pawn, and now knight to f6. White, without really having any good moves here, plays rook to d3, but now knight to e4. And now the problem is, even though yes, it looks like your pawn on c3 is nicely defended, there's no good square for your rook. You can't really move the rook. If you play something like rook to f3, then we simply win the rook. Knight to d2 check. Any other moves also don't work. If you play king to e1, the problem with king to e1 is we can play knight d6, and now your rook is blocking the bishop, and we're just going to capture that bishop. For example, king to d1, we're going to capture it, and after this is captured, we're going to play king to b6, and now we're going to capture this pawn, and it's, well, that's going to be game over very quickly. So instead, after knight to e4, Erdos tries rook to d1. He wants to give up the c3 pawn, but then the rook will have to move from the back rank, and then we can bring our bishop to the back rank and go after these pawns that are still on light squares. So here we have knight captures on c3, knight captures and rook captures on c3, followed by bishop to e8. Of course, we go after this pawn. So rook to c7, we have to defend it, but now this rook will be a little bit passive if you want to constantly have this f7 pawn defended. So now h4, Erdos starts pushing the past h pawn, king to b7. We have rook to b1 check, king to c8, and now even h5, continuing to push that pawn. Bishop to g7, and now comes king to e2. We have to bring our king into the game. We have king to d8, attacking the bishop, and now rook to b8 with check. And now again, if Alireza blocks this with the rook, then we can simply trade, and after bishop captures on f7, let's say king to d7, and it's a draw. There's no winning this. The bishops are of opposite colors. It's an easy draw. So after rook to b8 check, Alireza has to move the king. King to e7 was played, and now bishop back to b5. And now you will be able to win back your pawn with some like rook to a8 and rook captures on a5. So indeed, the rook has reached the pawn. So king to f6, Alireza starts improving the activity of his king. King to d3, white does the same. King g5, and now rook to a8, going after this a5 pawn. King captures on h5, we have rook captures on a5, and now king to g4. So now Alireza is still up a pawn, but white has this very dangerous passed a pawn. We have rook to a6, now comes king to f3, going after the pawn, and now rook to c6, offering a trade here. And you can't really trade this. If you trade this, we can just show it very quickly. Captures, captures, and now, of course, we want to queen our pawn here, so the bishop has to, you know, help out with the defense. For example, a5, bishop d6, we're going to go here, and then bishop b8 finally stops the pawn from reaching the a7 square, but now bishop e8 goes after this pawn, f6, bishop f7 goes after this pawn, e5, and now we can play captures, captures, and then bishop captures on d5 with check. And this is now a draw. If e4 with check, we can simply play king to d4. And now if king captures on f2, we simply capture this. Captures, captures, and captures. And this is now a draw. There's no way for you to win this. Black will simply put a bishop on a7 and then keep his bishop on this diagonal. Once the pawn is pushed to a7, we're going to give up the bishop for the pawn. And it is going to be a draw by insufficient material. So after rook to c6, we have rook to b7. Now saying, all right, at least you will not be pushing your passed pawn because the bishop is hanging. And now white has to be very, very careful here. But here white played rook to c2, and rook to c2 is a move that is unfortunately insufficient here. His idea is rook to c2, rook to b2, so the bishop will be defended, and then we can start pushing our a pawn. However, this doesn't really work. We're going to discuss why it doesn't work, but first, after rook to c2 was played, feel free to pause the video and try to find the winning idea for Alireza here while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting this incredible maneuver. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it is of course bishop to f6. This is the move that wins. And well, basically we need to cover this square, and that's how this is won. the problem is with rook to c2 that I said that we were going to discuss. Rook to d6 is better for the reason that after bishop to f6, you don't have to worry about such things. You just play rook to d7, and now either the rooks get traded off the board, and then it's a draw. I mean, the bishops are of opposite color, or the rook moves, and then you can capture on f7, which is still, drawish, but maybe even better for white. Who knows? This is the only way to play this for white. But after this rook to c2 was played, bishop to f6 now is a completely different story. Rook to b2 was played, now preparing to push the a pawn, but now bishop to d8, stopping the push of the a pawn, and now this bishop is coming to a5. And after that, you really will not have all that much to do with white. So here you don't have like king c3 with some idea of bishop to e2 to maybe win the rook. Here with the discovery, we can just play this check, and after king b3, even f4. I mean, black's pawns are just now completely dominant. So instead, rook to c2 was played, but it doesn't help. Just bishop to a5. Now comes rook to c5. And that's all there is. Bishop to e1 now. We're going to capture the pawn with the bishop. Also, why this bishop maneuver was so important, because we don't really have the option of capturing with the king. The rook was guarding that pawn on the second rank, but also we don't want to give the white king any free square. So it's better just to capture it with the bishop. Then we're going to be up 2 pawns, and then we are completely winning. So here, bishop to c6, attacking Alireza's rook. Rook to a7, and now there's really nothing to do. We're just going to capture this pawn. If you play rook to c2 to guard the pawn, then you've pretty much given up on all of your hopes. I mean, anything can be played here. We can even start pushing f4, f6, e5, and it's not going to be easy for white to hold this. So instead, Erdos decided to go out with a bang. He played rook to b5. Sort of giving up the a4 pawn and then trying to trick Alireza with rook captures on d5, but of course Alireza does not fall for this. He sees that, of course, the pawn can be captured. Rook captures on a4 is played. We have rook captures on d5, and now, of course, we don't play captures and captures, but Alireza just played rook to a3 with check, and it was in this position on move 56 that Viktor Erdos resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So a very, very impressive game by both of them, but an even more impressive victory for Alireza. I mean, the game had everything. It had a very, very exciting opening. Then that, king walk, king to d7 to c7 to b8, and then just after castling, you open up your king's position with b5, a5, starting for the going for the attack. And white held his own definitely throughout the entire game, and it all came down to this one moment where instead of going for rook to d6 to d7, he played rook to c2. I'm pretty sure Erdos spotted this possibility and knew that it was an instant draw because the theme, repeats itself throughout the game. Maybe he thought that this was a winning attempt for white, but he missed that the bishop here will just be incredibly, incredibly strong, and that the bishop will also be able to go to e1 and pick up the f2 pawn. So really a tough loss for Erdos, but a great victory for Alireza, who, as I imagine you guys are very much interested, is making his way, into the top 5, or rather, he is in the top 5. He's top 4 now. You can see that he is. He's currently won 16.6 points from the last period, when the points were added, and he's currently in number 4. So he needs some 5.5 points to reach Fabiano Caruana, and then we'll see what happens next. So maybe it's possible even in this tournament, but we'll see. It requires a lot of winnings, as he is much higher rated than his opponents here. But yeah, and also if you guys just want to check out on how the ratings are, you can always just check it out. It's the website 2700 Chess, so you can enjoy some live ratings, not just for classical, but also you have for rapid, for blitz, for juniors, for it's a good website. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Always a pleasure to check up on Alireza and see how he's doing. Is he already number 1, or rather number 2? It's no one is catching up to Magnus anytime soon. But yeah, that's it for this one. And I would like to thank, congrats, Dr. Theo Kone, Dr. B. Rensen, partner AG, Francis Ayer, James Toynton, and Kevin Hawkins for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this very nice event, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.